Good day and Good Friday, 10th April. Here we are, 2020, and what an astonishing time we live in. And it's just really incredible how we are expressing ourselves and managing with this complex world that we're living in right now. So before I get going on really part two of this, we'll just go through this little moment to allow people to connect. So just let's bear with each other, a little bit of patience, just to allow people to log on, okay, to see what they're all navigating this morning. So just a few seconds, we'll just give everyone a few seconds just to check in. For those that want to watch this live, and then for many people actually watched this as a recorded version. Last week there was quite a big number of people that picked up on this later on. So let's just give it a moment. Let's just make sure everyone's out there and catching on. So good. Right. I think I'm just going to begin because I think that's the best thing to do. And before I begin, I just want to do a little bit of a recap on where we were and really why we're here. And so just again, welcome to everyone that's watching this from all over the world. And I know there are audiences from just about every continent at the moment checking in and viewing what I have to say about our intelligence and how we can better access that. So welcome everyone, and thank you for watching and sharing the video of last week. Very helpful to help others begin to grasp and comprehend what's going on. So I began this endeavor last week because I realized that, at this time particularly, but generally, people battle. They battle with all sorts of things. They battle with an understanding of who they are. They may be battling with how they're going to approach their career and business as we begin to navigate our way out of COVID-19. They may be battling just generally with a view of themselves. They may be battling emotionally with managing and regulating the ups and downs, this continual upheaval of what we are feeling and what we're experiencing during this very strange and peculiar time. And they may be battling with bigger life questions, like why are we here? What is my purpose? And that sort of stuff. So I'm here because I want to remind everyone that within every single human being, there is a remarkable resource. We are born, as I mentioned last week, we're all born genius. And what that essentially means is that we are born into accessing our whole range of intelligence, our ability to deeply access our whole spectrum of intelligence. And just a quick reminder there, our intelligence is built on four essential pillars. Okay, that's the analytical intelligence. That's the stuff that allows us to set goals and objectives. Then there is performance intelligence, and that measures how well we do against those goals and objectives. How are we showing up? How are we navigating the obstacles that get in our way? And then there are two other very vital intelligences. Our creative intelligence, which is about vision setting and accessing our imagination. And then there is emotional intelligence, which is about how we show up with humanity and collaborate. We remember that we're social species. We are social creatures. We depend and rely and need each other. So it's when we access all four of these intelligences, and not without preference, just easily and comfortably, that is when we are at genius intelligence operation. So I mentioned that last week. Go back and have another look at that last week. But it's a reminder that we can actually, when we access this, we can actually go and find deeper resource and deeper levels of self and understanding self, that there is much more going on inside us. We need to also remember what neuroscience has told us. And, you know, neuroscience is fabulous because it can now confirm a lot of the mystery around how our operating system works. And what neuroscience confirms, and what we've known for some time, is that our brains are actually wired for creativity. So it's not just that we can access creativity, the actual system itself, the operating system, is designed to be creative. So let me just expand on that a little bit. Animals receive input, okay? So they will get an indication that there is food over there, and the output of the brain is go get the food, eat, okay? So humans aren't too much different from that. You know, we see the food, we eat the food, but what humans have, which animals don't have, is that humans have a prefrontal cortex that sits right in front of the forehead here. It's a part of the brain that allows us to interrupt the movement from input to output, okay? It allows us to process the input and output option. And what that creates for us is choice. It means that we can actually feel one thing, but act in a different way, okay? It allows us to analyze, to process, and make sense of our worlds. And that's really what sets us apart. So we have that ability to choose. We will always have choice. Whatever is in front of you, you're always going to have choice. And it's important to recognize that that sits within you as well. That means that our world experience, our life experience, isn't governed by a reactive response to things. We can be proactive in our response to things. And we're proactive when we engage the prefrontal cortex. So let me also just then recap, just excuse me as I look at these little notes that I want to refer back to. Remember last week I introduced you to the idea that we're governed by our habits, we're governed by our thinking habits, that we fall into this pattern of just experiencing our life through habit, through routine. Again, another wonderful aspect and facet of our operating system. It recognizes that when we become comfortable in doing certain things, or when we do things in a familiar way, the neuroscience just makes patterns of that. They become neuropathways. But we have a lot of positive neuropathways. We have a lot of indifferent neuropathways. And we also have a lot of negative neuropathways. Those are habits that disempower or limit us. Okay. So I got to thinking last week after sharing that with you, and just to help you contextualize this, and I'm going to read from something Mahatma Gandhi said about this, which I've always loved, and I found it last week. He said, your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. So everything begins in belief, it's translated through, and that's the habit, that's the patterning of what we're talking about. I mentioned last week what the Genius Program is, that it is in 3 parts, okay? And those 3 parts are, first part is a deep discovery, a deep dive into seeing what those habits of thinking are, recognizing the positive, okay? But placing an emphasis now on, well, what must I let go of in order to delve in and become that better version of who I am? So then we start looking to, well, what are the disempowering habits? Okay, and we began to consider listing those and journaling those and making a note of those. Okay, that's first part of this program. The second part of the program, which we're going to start delving into today, is about the liberating thinking. Okay, tools, insights that can inspire and motivate us, and importantly, change our thinking. Okay, so when we are trapped by disempowering belief or uncomfortable emotional feelings, we have this remarkable ability to shift into a different way of thinking. And there are liberating tools that can help support us in that can help motivate us and encourage us into that shift of thinking. And then the third part of the book, deeply embedded in the neuroscience, is that idea that we can, as human beings, we can develop new habits. And we can develop new habits if we practice the same thing consistently over a period of 21 days. Okay, so now that we're all in this fabulous lockdown, some of us much busier than we've ever been, many of us with time on our hands, now is a very, very good time to go on a journey of discovering what are the new things that you want to be. How do you want to show up as a new version of yourself after COVID-19? Okay, because we have that ability. We can adapt and we can reinvent ourselves. We can become younger versions of ourselves. We can go back to that glorious genius that we've had and enjoyed as children. Okay, we can access that again. We don't necessarily have to behave like children, but we can think like the child. Okay, we can go back to that marvelous capacity. And I'm going to talk about that kind of childish thinking in part 2. So part 1, what are the habits that are going on in my life that are dictating my outcomes that I want to change? Part 2, the liberating thinking. Part 3, how do I embed these? How do they become a part of my life? Okay, so we touched on 3 areas of habit thinking last week. We touched on voices of judgment, and those voices of judgment, I've given you an example of the narrative that goes on here, that past life story that I've got. This is what my father said, this is what my brother said, and how that influences my current behavior still. So if we're still attached to voices that informed us in the past, maybe supported voices that informed us in the past, but are no longer supporting us, they're limiting us. What are those voices? We also looked then at frames, and we did that little exercise on what is a frame, okay, and how that might be influencing you, that we could be approaching life from a frame of gender, okay, or we could be approaching life and understanding life from the framework of language, okay. All these frames limit our ability to see and take in the bigger picture. And if we recognize and acknowledge that I am a white male of a certain age group, with a certain language, with a certain understanding, if I acknowledge that and recognize that, okay, and can see that, it allows me to also consider that outside of me, there are different frames, people coming from different perspectives. So doing the work there of, right, what are the frames that are limiting me? What are those maybe beliefs that I have, or entrenched ideas that I have that are limiting or disempowering my thinking currently? Make a note of those. And then we also talked about a very disempowering state of thinking that most of us experience, and one that has been heightened through COVID-19, and that is fear, okay? And that fear is not real. Fear is an imagined state, okay? It's not something that somebody gives us. It's something we manufacture. We create fear in our minds. And just as we can create it, we can not have it, okay? And we can not have it by that very simple practice of recognizing if you have fear, immediately get it out of your head onto something concrete, a piece of paper. Write down what your fear is. And then alongside what you've written down, ask yourself, what can I do about this? And if there's something you can do about it, then act on that immediately. Don't hesitate. So maybe it's a phone call you've got to make. Maybe it's a reach out for some help that you've got to do. Maybe it's an apology that you've got to make. Okay, whatever it is, act on it. And as soon as you act, fear evaporates. Okay, so you'll often hear these quotations of approaching fear. Okay, or these challenge the fear, go toward the fear. And that's the reason why. Because if you distance yourself from the fear grows. It gets bigger. Okay. Remember, we have vivid, lively, and deep imaginations. So we create and we add to the idea of the fear that we have, and it just gets exponentially bigger and more scary. Okay. So when I was exploring this, I came across an amazing quote. It goes like this. My life has been filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. Okay, so if that resonates with you, it's by a French philosopher, Michel de Montaigne, okay, who said, my life has been filled with terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened. And how many of us have had that experience? That's what fear is. Fear's fabricated. We manufacture it. And we don't need to manufacture it. And if it arises, we can remove it by being in that present state. So just on the thinking habits thing, and again, I'm just going to these little notes here. I want to reach out and thank Lloyd, good friend of mine, Lloyd. Lloyd, thank you for that tip on, there's an app, there's a great app. So thank you, Lloyd. Lloyd mentions an app called, where is it, Lloyd? It's called, where is it, Lloyd? So here it is. Turn habits. Sorry about that. Pause, just accessing that again. Lloyd, thanks for that. Great app, Turn Habit. It's like a little logbook. So I was saying to you, start recognizing the thinking habits that you have, write them down. But here's an app that can help you do that. So look out for that app, Turn Habit. Okay, and thank you for that, Lloyd. Okay, so I'm just going to these notes. It helps, but I'll move on in a moment. Another very important concept to understand, and it comes to something very, very personal for me. I discovered my greatest breakthroughs came with not acquiring new ideas, but letting go of the ones that I had. Okay, so, and this is confirmed, I think, I can't remember who said this, but they said something to the effect of, our greatest challenge is not coming up with new, amazing ideas. Rather, it is to let go of the ones we already have. And that speaks to this idea again of recognizing what is it I am holding on to? What are the beliefs, values, deeper things that sit within me that I'm clinging to unconsciously that are not helping me move forward to become that better version of who I could be. So that's just a brief recap on where we were last week. Remember that if you've got any questions or you've got any challenges, please feel free to contact me. You can contact me on graham@grahambutchart.com. Just send me an email. That's the easiest way for me to respond to you. And I'm happy to just help you navigate whatever it is you're trying to navigate. But for the best part, let's just then carry on. Let's carry on as we pursue the concluding parts of part one, the three other areas that I want you to investigate regarding your habit thinking. And we're going to look at those, and then we're going to go to something, we're going to pause, and we're going to look at the introduction to part two, which is very interesting, and I think you'll like it. So there are three other areas that govern our habit thinking. So remember the first three, okay, were voices of judgment, frames, and fear. So the next three are story, comfort, and commentary. So story, I've kind of alluded to a little bit here that we have a narrative going on inside us. That narrative can be heavily influenced by external voices, okay? So we have those parental voices, those voices from the past, those influential voices, maybe teachers. In some cases, you know, things like government, spiritual leaders, all sorts of stuff can be very strong influences in our lives. But we also have that internal story that's going on, that internal narrative that drives us on and on and on. And we need to be very, very acknowledging of our own story, the story we continue to concoct, because the story I have at the present is built on the story that I was creating yesterday, the day before that, the week before that, the month before that, and the year before that. That has led me to this current understanding of the story we have. So if I've got a positive outlook of who I am and how I'm showing up in this world, then it's likely that the view I have of my story today is a positive one. Okay, I'm going to keep supporting the positive narrative that I have. But if I've also nurturing a disempowering part of my story, let's say I had a prior negative experience in a work situation or a social situation, am I continuing to allow that narrative to influence my current story? So, and many of us do this. Many of us have prior experiences, business arrangements, career points, meeting with other people, views of ourselves that fill that story of who we are. So we go out into the world with a bit of a, oh, poor me attitude, or I've not had it easy, okay? Or I didn't get the benefit of this particular education, or I came from the wrong side of town, or I'm disadvantaged because of. If we have any trail of that aspect to our narrative, that is going to keep showing up in the narrative going forward. You know who was really good at this, understanding this? Was Steve Biko, who spoke to Black consciousness. And he recognized that the enormous challenge faced by the Black community was a mental challenge, okay? It's the narrative, the story of where I have come from, my ancestral story leading me into the future. If I keep referencing the past story, all I'm going to do is create a future story. So add to your inquiry about voices of judgment, about the frames, and about the fear. Now start adding, what are my storylines? What are my narratives? Okay. Health narratives are interesting. You might have a health narrative. You might say, well, you know, I suffered from acute depression when I was 18, you know, because I was going through that awful teenage phase and I wasn't sure of the world and I became depressive, or I became depressed in that state. And that may be lingering in the frame of how you're viewing the world going forward. So because you had it then, okay, you've attached yourself to that narrative and you keep referencing that narrative in a present state. So be very, very intuitive here. Dig deeply into the story that you're telling of yourself. Let's move to the third part, because I'm very keen today to venture into part 2 of the book. The essentially then the fifth area of habit thinking sits in a thing called comfort. Okay, so you hear that word comfort and we get all relaxed. It's a lovely idea, comfort, isn't it? Okay, it's comfortable to sit on a sofa, feet up, you know, watching telly. Okay, it's also lovely, comfortable. I mean, some people make reference to comfort food. Okay. All right. Some people say to, you know, the children, are you comfortable? Okay. So there's comfort, okay, in a physical sense when we are comfortable All right. But when we are comfortable in our thinking, we potentially have a big problem. Okay. So let me give you a couple of practical examples of this. How many of you used to have a Nokia phone? Probably about 10, 12 years ago now, maybe longer. Okay. Well, at one point, 70% of the world, in fact, higher than that, when phones entering the world in a large way, 75% of the global population had Nokia phones. Okay. But we no longer have them because Nokia didn't stay in touch with touch technologies. In fact, they poo-pooed the idea of smart phones and technologies. What they said was, we own 75% of the market. We're doing nicely. So, bang, bingo that, right? How many of you had a BlackBerry at one point? They're an even more tragic story because BlackBerry had actually done all the research. They'd done the research. They saw where the market was going. But because they had such a controlled and captive, comfortable audience base, because they'd ring-fenced everybody through their what's in messaging system, they were comfortable in their thinking. They were secure in their thinking to suggest that, well, nothing can touch us. And of course, we know the story behind that. Apple launched WhatsApp, and bingo, that was the end of BlackBerry. So comfort thinking is hugely problematic. I remember being comfortable in my thinking when I was at the height of my advertising career. I got really complacent and comfortable about who I was, and that led essentially to my demise in that industry. It ended my advertising career. And you may experience similar moments in your life. So this fifth area of habit thinking is around what is comfortable in your thinking. Start investigating where you have got comfortable. You can also use the word complacent about your thinking. Because if you can start to recognize that now, then you may avoid becoming a Nokia or a BlackBerry or a Graham. Okay? You can avoid the fall off. You can start to see, this thinking of mine, that's not good. I default to comfort in my thinking. Okay, I default to comfort in my thinking when I keep referencing a particular source of support to my thinking. Okay, so my thinking may come from a particular comfortable space. Whoops, dangerous, because I run the risk now of continually referencing that. Okay, remember that nothing is static. We are moving forward all the time. Then moving to this sixth area of habit thinking, another dangerous area of habit thinking, and that is an area called commentary. So now commentary is very, very interesting. Commentary comes from a corporate environment, okay, and it's born when new entries into business propose radical ideas or inventive ideas into their work situation. They say to the established or the establishment in that work situation, they view it, they see the potential, because they're coming in from a unbiased perspective, because they're coming in from a neutral perspective. They look at the work environment and they say, you know what, that's very interesting. If Joe did this and Sally did that, there may be a different outcome. And they can see it because they're not attached to the habit of it, the comfort of it. Okay? So they see the innovative opportunity. And when they see the innovative opportunity, they reach out and they get proactive and they say, you know what, I've got a good idea here. Why don't we do X, Y, and Z? The corporate commentary response to this, and this is the area of commentary that I need you to be conscious of. The typical corporate commentary response is, that's a good idea, but, okay. And it's usually followed by things like, there's no money for it, it's outside your KPI, let's form a committee to discuss it further. That's not within your role description. If it is such a good idea, why hasn't somebody else done it before now? So there's a whole string of corporate commentary going on. And you may have become a victim of corporate commentary. In other words, you may unconsciously, habit thinking, be using corporate commentary in your narrative at present. You may be approaching situations and ruling out opportunities because your corporate commentary is alive and well. It's thriving. Okay. So in the little book, I list a whole version, a vocabulary, a dictionary list of all these little statements about corporate commentary. Okay, so big organizations are deadly in this. And the flatter the organization, the less likelihood this stuff has. The problem is if you've been in an organization for any length of time and you've adopted the habits of the organization, it's likely that you've adopted the corporate commentary habit. So that's it. That's the first part of this inquiry. That's the first part of this Genius program, which is to examine these 6 areas of habit thinking. Okay, so let me just go back over these quickly. The voice of judgment. Where are those voices in me? Okay, those past voices, current voices that are determining my thinking in a negative way, limiting, disempowering way. Okay, what framework of thinking am I coming from? Am I stuck in a male gender? Can I not see the world from the possibility of this broader understanding? Okay. What fear is going on inside me? Okay. How am I allowing that to dictate my responses? How am I allowing that to close down my action? Okay. That I have great control over fear. I can manage fear. I can conquer all fear through action. Okay. Then we talked about story, the narrative of who I am. Am I going to continue that referencing to my poor, sorry me previous state, or am I going to choose to create a new narrative and build on who I can be, show up as that better version? Then we looked at commentary, that soft, dodgy thing of thinking, okay, that comfortable, complacent thinking. Be very wary of that stuff is starting to invade your habit thinking. And then finally, that commentary, those lines of corporate jargon that we buy into and we start selling on to other people. Log those, okay, and just remember that you have the capacity to start eradicating that thinking from your life. But you're only going to do it if you can see it. And the only way you're going to see it is by writing it down. So use the app or write it down, capture that thinking, all right? So when you've done that, when you've got a journal of these thoughts, these ideas that are emerging, okay, then it's a very good idea to go through almost a ritual of letting go of these ideas. Okay? And those ideas will be across the following areas. There'll be a mental, there'll be emotional, there'll be living, there'll be professional, and they will be material areas. So let's go through mental, emotional, living, professional, and material. Mental, you understand that. Emotional, you understand that. Living, sometimes, okay, we acquire people, okay? We acquire all sorts of people around us, okay? They are positive until they're not positive, okay? And we can't detach from them. We feel obliged to hold them, okay? And we have to be very, very careful that this is working both ways. Our attachment to the person that is no longer serving us, okay, is holding them up and it's holding us up as well. So by recognizing these 5 areas, emotional, mental, living, professional speaks to Again, these ideas that we attach to our career, concepts that we might long to, models of how we've worked. We may have grown up using, for 10 years of our career, using a particular project management tool. We've become attached to it. We need to ask, is that still relevant? Okay. Is my way of working still relevant? Okay. So these attachments. And the material is a very obvious one. Okay. So what I mess around when I'm doing this live pre-COVID-19. If I've got groups of people with me, I get a bit cheeky and I get a bit naughty, and I challenge perhaps the women in the room. I say to them, "So how many pairs of shoes do you each have?" And there's this devastating sort of outpouring of like, "Yeah, my shoes, you know." And then I ask them so how many, how often do you wear these things? And the truth is that we all have stacks of stuff littered around our houses, which we don't use all the time. Okay, blokes, gents tend to have shirts that they have all these shirts, they have these great ranges of shirts that they never wear all the time, but they hang on to them, and it's a mental thing. They're hanging on to that. We're hanging on to things and the possibility at some stage recreating some future, at least recreating some past experience. Okay, so letting go of these areas and these ideas becomes very, very important. So you can go through this letting go process in a really nice, literal, spiritual fashion. You can let go in a ritualized way. Okay, so there are great stories around this. Let me share this story about my father. Okay, I built up resentments to my father, and I realized in my own personal journey of discovering who I was that it was very unfair of me to have attached these resentments or built these resentments about my father. Why I'd done that is because I'd been inconsiderate. I hadn't seen what he was going through in his life, what his challenges were. When I understood this process, I began to recognize that these were my resentments. I'd attached myself to these things. And resentments are very, very poisonous things. They can live within you. Okay. And resentments, if you don't deal with them, they're a bit like fear. They just carry on. They just keep going on and on and on. So you've got to go through this process of relinquishing your resentments towards other people. And the best way and the only way, effective way to do that is to actually speak to the individual concerned directly. And say to the individual, look, I really am sorry. I've built this resentment towards you because I've been inconsiderate as to what you're experiencing. And I want to say sorry for that. I want to let go of that. And you go through that process. So with my father, I'd had all these resentments about a lack of support to do the things I wanted, all sorts of things. I had a whole bundle of stuff. And after my dad passed away and we were scattering his ashes in a great big river in one of South Africa's national parks, which was an area he loved to be in. So we felt that was a nice spiritual place for him to return. After that exercise, I did a very spiritual thing myself. I did a very ritual thing. I took the resentments that I'd had and I wrote them on pebbles. I got a black pen and I wrote them down on pebbles and I threw them in the river alongside the ashes that were drifting away. I let go of the resentments, the ideas, the things that I had attached myself to my father. And after that point, I never had any unhealthy or unhappy or uncomfortable negative feelings about my father. I'd freed myself from this stuff. So if you want to email me about the idea of letting go of things and you're not sure, then please do so. But I do know, and neuroscience confirms this, when we ritualize a process, we really truly engaging with the idea and the intention of a deliberate ceasing to own something. And that's very important as you conclude this first part of the Genius program, where you've identified those areas that you need to detach from, those areas of your life that you need to let go of, and you go through this ritual process of letting go with them. And you can do that in all sorts of different exciting ways. Okay, be creative around that. Okay, explore around those opportunities. Okay, very often writing things down and just letting them be. Okay, is a very, very powerful way of acknowledging that. The science here is very important. Once you write something down and you acknowledge it, okay, that you're letting go of it, the rest of your operating system will actually conduct the mechanics of doing that. So be mindful of that process. So if there are any questions around part one, please let me know. You can just email me. If not, what we're going to do is we're going to move to part two of the book. Okay? And part two of the book is the liberating ideas. But before we do that, I've got something very interesting to share with you, which precedes the liberating ideas. And it's around context and context. Content and context. So I want you to look at this. So now you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. Somebody said, Graham, your videos are great, but it would be good if they had little graphics and titles. Well, it's very difficult to do that when you're on your own and you don't have a camera crew and an editing desk behind you that can throw up captions and stuff like that. So I'm going to just do it in a very practical, in a very demonstrative way. You may have seen, you may have even conducted this little mind game. Okay, let me just bring it forward. There we go. That's better. That's better. Okay, it's called the 9-dot challenge. Okay, so the 9-dot challenge is a challenge that says you have got 3 lines, okay, 3 straight lines, and your challenge is to connect the 9 dots, all of the 9 dots, using 3 straight lines. Okay. However, those 3 straight lines must also touch each other. Okay. So this is a real test of genius. Okay. But it's a real test of genius. But there's also a marvelous science behind this. And I'm going to explain the science to you in a minute. Okay. So connect the 9 dots using 3 straight lines, but those lines must touch each other. Okay. So what I love doing here is I love watching people do this. So again, pre-COVID-19, I'm in a room watching people do this. Okay, it's really interesting and it's really amazing to see the chemistry that they're experiencing, the uncomfortableness, the discomfort, the angst, what's going on here? Okay, because I know this, but I can't get to it. The frustration that is experienced when people do this. So I'm going to let you linger with this a little bit because you might be at this point in your mind trying to imagine, well, how does that work? How does that work? Okay. All right. So, but we're going to move on because we've got things to do, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the answer to that. Here we are. Here's the green lines. Okay, the green lines show you the answer. That's how you connect 9 dots using 3 straight lines that touch each other. Okay, right? You might, oh yeah, okay, I saw that. Yeah, I remember that. You know what's very interesting here? I've done this with people and then done it again 6 months, even just a week or 2 later, and they still get stuck in the same thing. They can't see it. Okay, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting little mental challenge. And there are a number of these little mental challenges that are very, very useful. And they're useful because they understand, they explain the chemistry, the mechanics of what's going on here. So now I'm going to just bear with me as I turn to the next page so that I can illustrate the science to you. And it goes like this. Okay, so here we go. Right, what's happened here? Okay, let's get that right. There we go. Getting it right. Getting it right. Bear with me. Okay. What's happened here is that There's content, oops, there it is, content, and there's context, okay? So in this case, the content are the dots and the lines. The context is the area in which we try and solve the problem. Because typically what happens is people see the square around that framework of 9 dots, and they try to solve the problem by operating within that square, okay? So what happens is we get caught up in the content. We get fixated by, well, how do the dots and the lines actually perform together, okay? I mean, everything's about the dots and the lines. Everything stays with the dots and the lines. But what actually is going on is the truth is, okay, the problem is solved when we adjust the context. When we move the context, when we alter the context, we solve the problem. Okay? When we stop looking at the dots and the lines for solutions, okay, and we look outside of the framework, okay, we look beyond the framework, we look to the white paper, we look to the background, okay, for our answer, that's when we solve the problem. So, problems are solved, okay, when you adjust, you look at the context, okay. What happens is we typically tend to want to look at the content, okay. So just reference that, keep coming back to that idea, okay. What I like to do with this exercise is I invite people to do it, okay, so I give them a bit of time, sit down. I like to see them struggle through it. Most people don't get there. Occasionally, you know, if you've got big groups, 1 or 2 of them figure it out. They go there, they release, or they've seen it before, so it helps them establish. But by and large, 90% of the room won't get it. Okay, and they won't get it because of this fixed linear education that we have. Okay, it comes from the immediacy to solve a problem in a particular way, and we need to do it within the confines of an area, okay? So that those 9 dots in a square tell our thinking to operate within the square of those 9 dots. That's the linearity of our thinking, okay? We are not educated to see the space behind us, okay? We're educated to see the content, okay? We don't look at the context in which the content sits. Problems are solved, great challenges are solved when we have the capacity to focus on the context. So always remember that. Don't look at the content. That's where you want to go. That's the habit thinking. Look at what the context is. Okay. So I get them to do the exercise. I get people to do the exercise, and when they see it, they say, "Oh, great! Oh, is that so obvious? Yeah, I think I would have figured that out. Yeah, I now understand it. I see the difference between context and content." And they go through this. Oh, yeah, lovely layout. Got it. All right. Now I ask them, "Have you got it? Do you understand? Are you with me on this?" And they'll go, "Yeah, I'm with you on this." Then I say to them, "Okay, so take a blank piece of paper. All right. And if you've got a blank piece of paper, do this, okay? Take a blank piece of paper and a pen, all right? And then onto that piece of paper, anywhere you like, write down the word cat. Yes, cat, C-A-T, okay? Done that? Right, I say to them, okay? Then I say to them, on that same piece of paper, write down the word mouse. Yeah, they do that, and there's little giggles, and they stare, and what's this all about, and where's this going? And then I say to the group, okay, so now what you've done is you've actually created a problem. And everyone looks at you blankly and said, well, what is the problem? And I said, well, you've put a cat and a mouse within the framework of that piece of paper. Okay, how do you solve that? And there's this deathly silence again. And people start looking at sorts of things, and they draw circles around the cat, or they cross out the mouse. Okay, they do all sorts of things. And then what you will hear and usually very, very quickly, some part of the room, somewhere off to one side, what you'll hear is somebody that goes like this. Okay. They've done it, right? They've done it because what they've done is they've torn the piece of paper to separate the cat from the mouse. Okay, that's what they've done. And there is addressing the context again. Okay, so whilst the piece of paper was one piece of paper with cat and mouse on it, the context was clear. Separate the paper. Okay, mouse on one context, cat in the other context. They get it. Okay, focusing on content, cat and mouse, isn't going to solve the problem. Focusing on the environment, context in which the cat and mouse sit, that addresses the challenge. So what I did there is I just tore up the notes that I was referencing earlier, which is very funny. So here we go, right? As we move into, okay, what we want to talk about now, okay? And what I'm going to talk about now is the liberating tools. So part 2 of the book, the liberating tools. Okay? So be mindful that your default setting will want to always take you to fixate on the content. Okay? Give up that thinking. Okay? Content's important, but what's important when you've got a challenge, when you've got to overcome something, is the context. And always try and keep coming back to that. Make a deep note about that. Make a deep note about that. So let's look to these liberating thinking tools. And this is where the program really comes alive. This is where it gets really exciting. And it gets interesting because most of these tools, okay, just about all of these tools, you already know, okay? You already know and you've been using them, but you've not been using them to the degree that you could be using them. And the first of these liberating tools is what I call observing with presence, okay? So, like so much of what we are in this hurried, busy world, we grab something and we move on. And we do it very, very quickly, okay? We grab it, we move on. We grab it, we move on. We just move on, we move on. We're living an awfully superficial life, okay? Moving through things in a very superficial fashion. Observing with presence as a tool is literally that simple. It's using your sight. And remember here, if you have it, you're fortunate that you have sight. But observing with sight and really exercising that becomes a disciplined, liberating tool. Just stay with this thought, okay? Just stay with this thought. Because we superficially observe. We just glance at things. But if we focus, if we become conscious of what we are seeing, and if we become more deliberate about what we are seeing, we start to see more. So if I say to you now, because you can continue listening to me whilst you look somewhere else. If I say to you now, look at the ceiling of wherever you are, observe the ceiling, really look at the ceiling and start to identify things about the ceiling that you may not have seen before. Look into the corners of the ceiling. Stretch your vision into other areas of the ceiling. Come down the wall. Look at the wall. This is probably a familiar area. It could well be a deeply familiar area, given that you've been in lockdown for a period of time. But look at the wall and see if you can see aspects of the wall you hadn't noticed previously. It's about going to a deeper level of seeing. Okay. Move across the wall, down the wall, look to the floor. Okay. Look around the room, look at the corners of the room. Look at the floor, look at the detail on the floor. Okay. What are you seeing as you examine that floor more closely? Okay. Bring your vision now closer towards you as it moves up across the floor. Okay. Hold a hand out in front of your eyes. hold one of your hands up. Okay, look at it. Turn it with the nails facing you. Look at the skin. Look at the detail of that skin. Look at the complexity of that skin. Look at the skin. Okay, observe it. Turn it over. Okay, follow the hand down through the arm. Okay. Look. So what we're doing with this idea of observing with presence is we are introducing our neural pathways to seeing more out of the same moment, seeing more out of witnessing the same content. Because when I see more out of the same content, okay, I can experience more. I'm better informed. I have more knowledge, more data with which to work. If I am fleeting in my observations, I am limiting the data available to me. The interesting thing here seems to be that it takes longer to do this, but if you practice it, okay, in other words, if you stretch your visioning, okay, you are stretching the neural pathways. So the neuroscience supports this. You're extending your visioning. You will begin to notice, if you introduce this as a practice, that you are starting to see things in the environment in which you've lived that you've never seen that way before. And it's empowering. It's empowering because, as I say, it gives you more data, greater input. It also then provides you with this richer opportunity of choice. So, this is the first tool, okay? Observing with presence. Just spend a moment to consider this. Just take this in, okay? I am now asking your senses, and remember that it is our senses that gather the information for our operating system to make decisions about the actions that we're going to take. And if you go back to what Gandhi's saying, those actions become habits, and those habits become our values, those values become our destiny. So if I'm limiting my information coming in by not being as observant as I could be, then I'm limiting my future state. I'm reducing the possibilities available to me going forward. We take our observing, we take our seeing in a very, very casual fashion. We need to be more intuitive about that. So, observing. I'm conscious now of the time that we have spent together. So, I want to start rounding up. I want to tell you, though, before we round up, about the second liberating tool. And the second liberating tool is what I call feeding the soul. Okay, so this is about accessing music. And you will know this already. Music can be a deeply penetrative experience because there is a part of music, and your musicians out there, those people that understand the science, the mathematics of music, will know this, that there's a middle C, I think it is, called, that resonates at a certain frequency, and that frequency is the same frequency with which the human body resonates as well. So we will feel a particular piece of music, and that resonation will take place within us. We will resonate accordingly, which is why people start dancing to music. They up and they start moving to the rhythm, the beat, the frequency of the music. Okay? But music does more than that. Music is incredibly powerful in the sense that it can alter our thinking. So I could spend a morning listening to Leonard Cohen, all right, who I really value and enjoy, but the melancholy, the loneliness of a lot of the music of Leonard Cohen can have an influence on what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking and how I'm expressing who I am. I can choose to go to that melancholy. Or right? I can choose to listen to something more upbeat. So your challenge here, and I want to leave you with things to do this week, because we're going to meet again next Friday. So I want to leave you with things to do this week. Your challenge here is to find what I call your top 10. Find the top 10 pieces of music that cause you to get up and feel empowered. So not the melancholy stuff, not the pieces of music that say, oh, I remember, Elvis is good at this. Not the pieces of music that take you back to old lovely moments. Not that stuff, not the stuff that you sing along to necessarily, the kind of music that you can feel an energy rising in you, a positive energy that makes you want to just move. It energizes you. So find your top 10 energizing pieces of music. Okay? And here's the thing. When you are starting to feel low, when you are challenged by the covetousness of what we're experiencing, or when you want to motivate yourself into doing some deep writing about what you're experiencing or exploring those habits of thinking further, put that music on. If you want to change your mental, emotional state, music will do that in a beat. Okay? So reach out for that empowering musical feeling, right? Conscious of the time. So I want to now wind up a little bit. Rushed over those last two things, but we'll touch on those again in the week coming, all right? So let's just wind up for the day. Let's just round off. Remember, I wanted you to focus on the first part of the journey. The first part of the journey was to deeply dig into those 6 areas of habit thinking. Start to identify and acknowledge that your thinking has been governed by these 6 areas of thinking. What are they? List them. Okay, build that inventory. When you've got that inventory, look at that inventory and start letting go of it. And make sure that letting go is ritualistic, that you are conscious, I am letting go of this. I am choosing to let you go. Off you go. Thank you. I no longer need you. We then delved in and we started to look at the second part, the liberating tools. And to introduce you to those liberating tools, I talked about the difference between content and context. Super important, because it's one of our deeply set, ingrained, habitual behaviors. We focus on content instead of considering the context. So go back to that exercise again. Go back to the cat, the mouse, the piece of paper. Go back and start to explore. And in fact, you can look up. There's a great book. It's called Thinking Toys, right? By the way, if you want my reading list, just email me a request for my reading list and I'll send that on to you. But in this book, Thinking Toys, he explores all these little mental games. They're great little mental games. They will help you start to disconnect from this urge to go to content instead of seeing where the solution comes from, which is altering the context. And then briefly and quickly, I introduced you to 2 of the liberating thinking tools. Observing with presence. That is about expanding your vision. Okay. Remember that over 60% of the data you receive comes from your seeing. But are you using your seeing, or are you just superficially experiencing your seeing? And then liberating your soul. Okay. Feeding your soul with music. Find those 10 pieces of music that when you hear them, you just want to move. You can just feel that energy pulsating, rising in you. Okay, find those 10 pieces of music and use them to liberate your thinking. Okay, so that's it for today. Okay, just want to remind you, I'm here for you because in these difficult times, I want you to know that you have within you a remarkable resource. It's your whole intelligence. We're all born with it, and we can access it. We can access it if we start to use these tools. You can access your whole intelligence, and you can really begin to show up as a better version of who you are. It's not done overnight, okay? It's done through consistency, practice, and commitment. And as we move into the third part of the program next week, as I reveal more of these tools, I'll start to place emphasis on consistency, on practice, because that's what it's about. This wonderful thing called discipline, okay? We can change, we can control how we show up. We can determine that we can experience a better version of our lives by becoming better versions of who we are. How do I know this? Well, I've done it myself, and I've witnessed it in many people, many people, okay? So be safe, be smart, and I'll see you again next Friday. So thank you for that. Bye now.